What if hunger didn't just gnaw at your stomach, but at your faith? What if the only thing left in your home was dust, silence, and a statue of the Virgin Mary staring back at you as if she knew something you didn't? In a forgotten town called Willow Creek, Kansas, population barely 600, one family would soon face the storm that stripped them of everything. And what came after would turn an ordinary kitchen into holy ground. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Winter arrived too soon that year. The cornfields stood like skeletons, brittle and gray beneath a pewter sky. Grace Whitmore leaned on the porch rail, her coat too thin, her eyes hollowed by weeks of rationing. Inside, the last can of beans sat unopened on the table, not out of denial, but out of fear of what would come when it was gone. Thomas, her husband, had stopped pretending there was work to find. The drought had starved the land, and the flood after it had drowned hope itself. His hands, once brown and calloused from turning earth, now trembled when he tried to strike a match. "God helps those who help themselves," he muttered, more to the wind than to her. Grace said nothing. Words about God had begun to sound like arguments, not comfort. Their two children, Anna and Samuel, sat near the window, wrapped in a shared blanket. Samuel had tried hunting again that week, but the forest was silent, stripped bare by cold. Anna folded paper angels from the old church bulletin she found under the couch, small, lopsided messengers she lined beside the statue of Mary on the shelf. "Maybe Father Hale can help," she whispered. Thomas exhaled through his nose. "The church can't feed everyone." Grace looked toward the statue, chipped but steady, a trace of blue still clinging to its robe. "Maybe not everyone," she murmured. That night, the wind tore through Willow Creek like a living thing. The power failed before sunset, and the family huddled close to the stove's dying ember. Thomas sat with his back to the statue, his pride too heavy to turn. Grace noticed Anna watching it still, eyes wide, unblinking. "In the firelight, her face looks different," the girl said softly. Grace turned. For a moment, it did. The Virgin's face seemed to shift, not into a smile, but into something deeper. Not sorrow, not joy, knowing. Thomas barked a laugh that cracked in the quiet. "You're seeing shadows, that's all." But even he couldn't shake the chill that followed. By morning, snow had buried the world in silence. Grace stepped outside to fetch firewood and froze. Right before the door, where the drift should have risen knee-high, the ground was bare, melted into a perfect circle, no wider than a dinner plate. The soil there was dry, and when she touched it, warmth lingered under her fingertips. Thomas came behind her, squinting. "Pipe leak, has to be." She didn't answer. The pipes hadn't worked for a week. That evening, hunger pressed harder. Samuel searched the cupboards again, desperate, while Anna whispered her Hail Marys to the statue. Grace lifted the empty kettle, her hands shaking. She said, "I'll make tea," quietly. Thomas almost snapped. No water, no leaves, no point, but something in her tone stopped him. Grace filled the kettle with snow and set it on the cold stove. Her eyes lingered on the Virgin's face. She whispered, "Not for me, for them." Then, as if guided, she began to pray aloud. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Her voice quivered at first, then grew steady, echoing through the quiet house. When she reached "Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death," the kettle rattled. Thomas frowned. "Grace, the stove's not lit." She lifted the lid. Steam unfurled, slow and sweet, smelling faintly of honey, as though the snow had remembered spring. No one spoke. Grace poured the water into chipped cups. Samuel drank first. His eyes widened. "It's warm," he whispered. Grace took a sip too. Plain water, but soft, alive. That night, for the first time in months, they slept without fear. Before dawn, Grace woke to a sound. Not the wind. A knock, gentle, deliberate, against the wooden door. She arose, heart pounding, and opened it. No one stood there. Only tracks in the snow, prints small and delicate, bare soles pressed into the white, each one leading straight to the door and stopping there. None turned back. Grace called for Thomas. He came, staring down at the footprints. "Some kid," he said, but his voice wavered. The prints were too perfect, too still. Inside, Anna clutched the statue to her chest. "She came," the girl breathed. "I saw her standing by the window." Thomas turned away. "You're dreaming, Anna." Grace touched the melted circle by the doorstep, still warm despite the snow. Or maybe we all are. By the week's end, whispers spread through Willow Creek. The Petersons swore their empty pantry smelled of baking bread. The Morales family found their cow alive under a collapsed shed. No one could explain it, least of all Father Joseph Hale, who drove from St. Mary's Parish to investigate. When he stepped into the Whitmore home, he expected hysteria, but found peace. Grace knelt before the statue, her children beside her. The air shimmered faintly, as if dust motes carried light instead of reflecting it. He waited until her prayer ended. "What did you ask her for?" Grace looked up, eyes red, but calm. "Just enough to feed my children." The priest's gaze shifted to the table. A loaf of bread sat cooling there, still warm. "And she did," he whispered. Outside, the morning light broke through the clouds, spilling gold over the snow. Across the town, ovens that had long been cold began to glow again. Women swore they hadn't lit them. In one house, dough rose in a bare bowl. In another, a child's hand reached into a sack once empty and drew out flour. From that dawn onward, Willow Creek never went hungry again. Not because the land healed overnight, but because hope had taken root where despair once lived. And in Grace's home, the small statue of Mary still stood by the window, eyes lowered, face unchanged, but the ground beneath her feet remained warm. When word reached the county, the story was already halfway between miracle and rumor. Some said the Virgin Mary had appeared in Grace Whitmore's home. Others swore it was nothing more than imagination, the kind people clung to when hope was gone. But no one could deny the one fact that made even skeptics hesitate. No one in Willow Creek had gone hungry since that night. The morning after the first warm bread appeared, neighbors began arriving at Grace's porch with disbelief hidden beneath politeness. Mrs. Weller brought a pie dish, asking if Grace might lend her yeast. Grace almost laughed. There had been no yeast in her home for months, yet she handed over a small lump of dough from her last batch. "It'll bake fine," she said softly. It did. In fact, every oven in town baked fine that week, even those that hadn't worked since the flood shorted their wiring. By Sunday, the pews at St. Mary's were full for the first time in years. Father Hale faced a congregation who didn't sing out of habit, but hunger for something larger than bread. After Mass, he drove straight to Grace's home. He found Thomas out back, repairing a fence that the wind had split in half. For a man who'd spent months avoiding prayer, Thomas now moved with quiet purpose. "You've seen it yourself?" the priest asked. Thomas didn't look up. "I've seen it, smelled it, ate it, but I don't understand it." Father Hale nodded slowly. Understanding comes after gratitude. Inside, Grace set another loaf to cool. The smell filled the room, not just of wheat, but of something else. Sweetness without sugar, warmth without fire. "I haven't bought flour in weeks," she confessed, "but every morning there's more in the tin." The priest crossed himself. "Have you spoken to anyone beyond the town?" Grace shook her head. "Would they believe me?" He looked at the statue, the same small virgin, still chipped, still ordinary. But he noticed something he hadn't before, a faint sheen over her robe, as if touched by dew. He leaned closer. "Did you polish it?" Grace smiled faintly. "No, I just clean it with the same cloth I dry the children's hands with." When he reached out, his fingers brushed marble coolness, then warmth, pulsing faintly, like breath behind stone. 2 days later, strangers began arriving. A man from Topeka, a nurse from Wichita, a photographer with a broken tripod. Some came out of curiosity, others came carrying candles. Thomas hated the attention. "They'll turn this into a sideshow," he warned. Gray stood by the window, watching a mother kneel in their yard, clutching her infant. "If they come to pray, let them." The photographer's name was Alan Reese. He'd once covered wars overseas, but said nothing ever unnerved him like that house. "I took a picture," he told the local paper, "but when I developed it, there was light where there shouldn't be, over her hands like dawn caught in marble. The editor refused to print it. Looks touched up," he muttered. But Alan swore, under oath, it wasn't. One night, as the first thaw began, Grace dreamed she was standing in the field again, the same one where her husband used to plant corn. But the ground wasn't frozen. It shimmered as though something alive moved beneath it. She heard her name whispered once, not frightening, but intimate, like a mother calling her child home. When she awoke, her hands smelled faintly of magnolia, though none bloomed in Kansas until spring. That same morning, Father Hale returned, this time with another priest, an investigator sent by the diocese. Father Donovan was younger, sterner, with the kind of skepticism Grace had once carried herself. He examined everything, the bread, the kettle, the floor near the melted patch of snow. "You claim the bread multiplies?" he asked. "I don't claim anything," she replied gently. "I only bake." He pressed on. "Have you seen any visions?" She hesitated. "Not with these eyes." The younger priest frowned, unsatisfied. But Father Hale watched her with quiet awe. "He speaks like scripture," he murmured. That night, they stayed to observe. The priest sat by the table, the family kneeling nearby. Outside, the wind carried snow like ashes. Grace began her prayer, the same Hail Mary she'd whispered that first night. When she reached the words, "Pray for us sinners," the air shifted, not dramatically, just a hush, as if the whole house held its breath. Then came the faintest sound, a kettle's soft rattle. Father Donovan leaned forward. "Did you light the stove?" Thomas shook his head. Steam rose again, slow, steady, carrying the same scent of honey in spring water. The younger priest's hands trembled. Impossible. Father Hale only whispered, "Not to her." Word reached the bishop within days. He ordered discretion, fearing superstitious contagion. But it was too late. Willow Creek had become a place of quiet pilgrimage. Cars lined the road every weekend. Some came with hope, others with skepticism, but all left with something they couldn't explain. A farmer from Nebraska said his crop finally sprouted after sprinkling soil taken from near the Whitmore porch. A widow claimed her fever broke after drinking from the kettle's water. None of it could be proven. None of it could be dismissed.
When journalists came, Grace hid inside. She didn't like the flashbulbs, the notebooks, the endless questions. Thomas faced them at the gate. "We're not special," he said, "just hungry." One reporter asked, "Do you think it really was the Virgin Mary?" He thought for a long time before answering. "I think she came because no one else did." That quote ran in the Kansas Tribune under the headline, "Hunger Fed by Faith in Willow Creek." By spring, the bread still came, but so did something else: humility. People began bringing their own loaves to share, trading wheat, sugar, prayers. The town that once whispered now sang. Bells rang at St. Mary's again, though no one remembered pulling the rope. One evening, as Grace placed another loaf on the sill to cool, she saw something at the edge of the yard. Faint, like a mirage, a figure wrapped in white, not approaching, only watching, then gone. She didn't call for Thomas, she only whispered, "Thank you." Because by then she understood it wasn't about bread anymore, it was about remembrance, about what happens when emptiness finally makes room for grace. By early summer, Willow Creek no longer felt like a place people drove through. It had become a place they stopped at. The Whitmore's small farmhouse, once unremarkable, now breathed like the quiet center of a mystery. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood where it always had, chipped, modest, unchanged. Yet her presence pressed on the air like warmth before rain. Every morning before sunrise, Grace opened the door and found something waiting. A jar of milk unspoiled in the heat. A scatter of flour across the porch, as if the wind had turned into a baker. She no longer asked how, she simply whispered, "Thank you for remembering us." Thomas, meanwhile, was restless. The miracle that fed them only deepened his doubt. One evening, hammer in hand, he stared at the mended window frame and muttered, "If heaven's feeding us, why not feed them all?" Grace didn't look up. "Maybe it isn't food she gives," she said softly. "Maybe it's faith, and we're meant to share it." He said nothing, but that night, after the house fell still, Thomas knelt beside the statue for the first time in years. He didn't ask for proof, only for courage. "Make me less afraid to believe." The wind outside stirred, as if answering, but only in a whisper. A week later, Father Donovan returned, bringing someone new. Sister Agnes, a lay investigator from the diocese. A woman in her 60s with wire-framed glasses and a face creased by both reason and reverence. She had studied alleged miracles across 3 states and believed most of them could be explained away by dust, heat, or grief. She said, "I hope yours can too, because the unexplained tends to make the church uneasy." Grace smiled faintly. "Then may heaven ease what man cannot." Sister Agnes took careful notes: humidity, temperature, even the faint tick of the clock on the wall. She murmured, "Steam rising without flame," watching the kettle tremble on its unlit stove. Either physics bends or grace does. That night, she asked to stay. In the witching hush before dawn, Sister Agnes stirred, unsure why. The house breathed differently, like something awake in its bones. She rose and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The moon cast a thin band of light through the window, falling across the statue. Grace knelt nearby, head bowed, hands clasped. The words of her prayer barely stirred the air. "Hail Mary, full of grace." The sound of the kettle began, a low hum, lid trembling, though the burner below was cold. Then movement, not of shadow, but of shimmer. At the statue's base, a faint glow unfurled, not bright, but alive, like dawn remembering its promise. Agnes froze, cross clutched tight. The glow pulsed once, then stilled. The kettle sighed and went silent. Grace opened her eyes slowly, unaware she'd been witnessed. "Did you see?" Agnes asked softly. Grace shook her head. "I only felt peace." Agnes closed her notebook without a word. Days passed. Reports were demanded. Sister Agnes delayed her findings, writing and rewriting, unsure what truth demanded of her. To deny it feels dishonest, to affirm it dangerous. She confessed to Father Donovan. He only said, "Perhaps it's neither denial nor proof. Perhaps it's an invitation." The next Sunday, the church overflowed again. Among the crowd was George Latham, a wheat farmer from outside town. His drought had lasted 4 summers. He brought with him a tin box of shriveled seeds. During communion, he left the box at the statue's feet. He said nothing, only bowed and whispered, "If you can feed the hungry, feed the soil." 3 mornings later, George knelt in his furrows. Tiny shoots pierced the dry crust, green blades trembling like forgotten promises reborn. He didn't call it a miracle. "Maybe the earth just remembered," he said, though his voice broke on the word.
Meanwhile, in Topeka, the bishop's desk filled with letters, reporters, skeptics, pilgrims. Official silence was maintained, but quietly a file began to circulate. Case 47W, Whitmore Incident. Photographs showed the statue as ordinary as before, except one, taken under ultraviolet light. The technician frowned. UV beam unveiled palms dusted in iridescent grains. Faint shimmer, like fine ash, turned to light. The lab report read only, "Not flower, unknown." In the margin, the bishop's assistant scribbled, "Non naturale." The ripples widened. A traveling nurse claimed her clinic's shelves refilled overnight. A teacher swore her students stopped skipping lunch because someone always brings too much. Grace avoided interviews. She kept her kitchen quiet, her prayers steady. But she noticed the faint change in the air, the scent not of roses, but of wheat after rain. And sometimes when she cleaned the statue, she swore she felt the marble pulse faintly beneath her cloth, like breath through stone. August came. A storm rolled over the plains, thunder cracking across the horizon. Lightning struck the old willow near the creek, splitting it in 2. Flames leapt, licking toward the farmhouse, then stopped. When dawn broke, the fire had died without spreading. In the ash, Thomas found 3 things untouched: a loaf of bread, a small wooden cross, and a single footprint, tiny, bare, pressed in gray dust. He stared at it for a long time, heart tight in his chest. Grace joined him silently. She didn't speak, only knelt, tracing the print's curve with her trembling hand. Small, perfect. A child's step left in the ruin. The wind carried wheat scent through the charred air, not sweet, not sorrowful, only steady, as if the earth itself had learned to breathe again. News of the Whitmore's miracle spread quietly like wind carrying pollen. It began in whispers, a grocer's wife telling her sister, a farmhand murmuring in line at the post office. No one called it supernatural, they just said something good was happening again. In the towns beyond Willow Creek, radios picked up the tale, and priests debated it in sacristies. Yet it wasn't the church's decree that kept the story alive, it was the hunger beneath it. People didn't crave proof, they craved hope. One morning, Grace opened her door to find a woman standing there. Thin, trembling, her dress torn at the hem. The stranger clutched an old purse, eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Please," Grace said softly, "before the wind takes you." The woman hesitated. "You don't even know me." Grace smiled faintly. "That's never stopped mercy." The woman, Ruth, she said, sat at the table. When Grace broke bread for her, Ruth lifted a piece to her lips. Crumb melted on her tongue, and for an instant, Her eyes widened. She saw it. A kitchen long gone, her mother's hands dusted in flour, whispering the Hail Mary over dough that rose with warmth and trust. Ruth began to cry, not from hunger, but from remembering. Grace watched, silent. Some prayers only rise when the world stops needing them. By midweek, Sister Agnes returned with permission and instruments. The diocese had sent her to collect evidence, to separate faith from folklore. Thomas helped her set up the devices, uneasy. "You'll find nothing but flour and hope," she smiled. "Then I'll call that a miracle enough." She swabbed the statue's fingers, noting faint shimmer under lamplight. When the ultraviolet lens swept across, color stirred, a soft cerulean breath along the stone palms. She blinked, leaned closer. The lab later sent back a single line. Organic traces present, origin indeterminate. Agnes read it twice, folded the paper, and whispered, "So even science leaves room for grace." Summer stretched over Kansas like gold cloth. George knelt in his fields, palms to the dirt, tiny sprouts piercing soil like forgotten promises. He closed his eyes and thanked God not for the miracle, but for remembering them at all. Yet with the faithful came the curious and the hungry for profit. Cameras lined the churchyard. Reporters asked for statements, samples, sound bites. One investor offered Grace $10,000 for the statue, calling it a relic of potential significance. Grace refused. She's already done what she came for. That night, wind pressed hard against the shutters. Thomas woke to a creak, a draft colder than rain. He rose, crossed the hallway, and froze at the threshold. Latch forced, shelf bare. The space where she had stood, now empty, and his heart echoed that same void. He fell to his knees. "Not again, please." When Grace found him moments later, she didn't speak, only traced the air where the statue had been, her hand trembling as though memory still lingered there. 3 days passed. On the 4th, George burst into the yard, breathless. "By the creek," he shouted. "You need to see." They ran, boots splashing through dew and mud. There, against the split willow, stood the statue, upright, untouched, washed clean by the flood's retreat. Silver streaks shimmered along her robe's folds, as if morning itself had clothed her. At her feet rested a single loaf of bread, whole, unburned. Beside it, one small print pressed into the damp earth. Grace sank to the ground, tears falling freely. "She went where the water is," she whispered, "and came back where hunger ends." That night, Sister Agnes completed her final report. She followed the bishop's instruction: document, verify, avoid spectacle, yet paused at the end, pen hovering over the page. Material remains unclassified. Object immovable by human force. Community reports enduring peace and providence. She hesitated, then added beneath it, presence unprovable, but undeniable. When all had gone quiet again, Grace sat by the window. Thomas leaned in the doorway, watching her silhouette in the lamplight. "Do you think she'll come again?" he asked softly. Grace smiled. She never left. Outside, the moon drifted over the creek. It caught the statue's face, neither sorrowful nor stern, but alive with something unspoken. The gaze wove compassion, memory, an unspoken vow, all in silence. The wind carried a whisper through the wheat, not words, but sustenance, the kind that fills without feeding, the kind heaven leaves behind when bread has done its work. Winter returned to Willow Creek like an old visitor, gentler now, almost reverent. Snow brushed the rooftops but melted quickly on the church steps where candles still burned each night. No grand processions, no headlines, just hands, rough, trembling, grateful, laying loaves beside the statue as quietly as they once prayed for them. The town had changed, though no one spoke of it. Children no longer ran past the church. They paused, whispered the Hail Mary in uneven rhythm, and left crumbs for sparrows.
Men who once mocked faith began mending pews, and in the confessional, Sister Agnes heard fewer sins of despair. It was as though Willow Creek remembered hunger but no longer feared it. A year passed. Thomas and Grace rebuilt the bakery. It wasn't large, just enough to feed the town. On the wall hung a small frame. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Every loaf bore a cross, pressed faintly on its crust. Some said the pattern looked like wheat, others like hands. Grace said it looked like breath. When visitors asked for the miracle's proof, Thomas would smile and gesture toward the ovens. "You're eating it," he'd say. In early spring, Sister Agnes received word from the diocese. The report had been archived, labeled non concludum, inconclusive. She smiled, as all mysteries worth believing are. Before leaving Willow Creek, she visited the statue one last time. Snowmelt trickled at Mary's feet, glittering like thin glass in morning light. Agnes bent down to wipe the base clean, but the cloth returned scented faintly of bread. She folded it into her sleeve and whispered, "For the next hungry soul." That evening, Ruth returned, no longer frail, cheeks fuller, eyes bright. She brought with her a small child clutching a wooden rosary. "His name's Luke," she said, "named for the one who told her story best." Grace embraced her without a word. The child stared up at the statue, hand half raised as if waving. For a heartbeat, the candlelight flickered, and the marble eyes seemed to soften. Grace blinked, unsure. The glow faded, but the warmth remained. Later that night, Thomas sat by the bakery window, unable to sleep. The ovens were cooling, the scent of yeast lingered. He looked toward the church, its outline dim in the snow haze. The same star that had hung above the creek the night the miracle began now shimmered faintly, steady, patient. He remembered that winter when they had nothing left. And now, bread on every table, peace where questions once lived. He whispered, "We asked for food. She gave us faith disguised as flour."
The next morning, Grace found him kneeling before the statue, not praying, just watching. On the marble palm, something glistened, a drop, round as a tear, catching sunlight before fading. She didn't speak, neither did he, because in that silence, something holy breathed, not thunderous, not dramatic, but steady, like the world remembering how to hope. Days later, a letter arrived from Sister Agnes, now serving at a hospice outside Wichita. Inside was the folded cloth from the statue's base, now dry but still fragrant. The note read, "Wherever there is hunger, there she walks unseen. Tell the people the miracle was never the bread, it was the hands that kept breaking it." Grace placed the letter beside the statue, her fingers lingering at the marble edge. She turned to Thomas and whispered, "Then we keep breaking it." He nodded, "Until no one's hungry." Years later, travelers passing through Willow Creek would sometimes stop by the church. They said the place smelled faintly of bread, even when no loaves were baking. And if they stayed until dusk, they swore the statue's face caught light just so, soft, alive, almost breathing. Some said miracle. Some said trick of the sun. The people of Willow Creek said nothing at all. They only smiled, crossed themselves, and went back to needing. Because once you've tasted heaven in hunger, words feel smaller than grace.